tone was going to be. What I didn't really know and what I was struggling with, I knew how I wanted it to sound, I just didn't have the notes, you know. And that took a bit of time, was just the general sort of the quirkiness of the Holmes tune. And that took a bit of, you know, I mean, they're all battles. They're all, you know, me sitting here for weeks on end, you know, and at the end of the day, I come up with this, you know, pathetically simple tune, and I have no idea why it took so long. And it's really getting rid of all the notes that were in its way, you know. And you know, look, all filmmakers go through this with every bit. You know, look, I just put down the phone with Chris Nolan. You know, we're talking about, you know, I can say to Chris, I have no idea what to do, and he doesn't panic. He actually, he knows that if I said, oh, I know exactly what to do, that's when he should panic, because then I'd just be dragging out the old stuff out of the, you know, the drawers.
So in that movie, you started at the beginning, I guess.
With Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
So did he just call you up and say, hey, got another one?
Well,
start thinking about it?
No, Chris and I, we actually have found a fantastic way of working. We don't live too far from each other on the beach, and we phone each other and we go, come on, let's take the kids down onto the beach. And we sit on the beach, kids are playing, and we're chucking ideas back and forth between the two of us and get terrible sunburns. It works.
That's a good process.
Right.
So when did you first get your dun, 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 did you get that first theme?
I had it. It was sort of half. It was half there, and then Guy came into the room one day and said, "Can't you get a little bit more quirky?" And literally, you know, I finished it with Guy in the room. With Guy, literally, I mean, he was conducting me. You know, he'd say, "Okay, let's put the scene up. Just play it on the piano." You know, and I'm a dreadful piano player. You know, he'd go, "No, quiet. Leave a gap here." Da, da, da. So, you know, and we worked out. We didn't just work out the notes, but we worked out, you know, how he liked things spaced. You know, that he did like, you know, singular events happening as opposed to like sort of a mush of lots of instruments doing things. So. And he's patient. He's good, you know, because you know you sit there and you know it's at the periphery of my vision, you know, and I now need him to shut up and sit down and let me just go and work that out. And I mean, everybody talks about how film is a collaborative process. For better or for worse, I actually think that's true. So I don't mind the director being in the room as I'm writing.
And have the directors been consistent, or they all want to be hands-on and chatty, or
no? Some of them don't. No. Some of them just want to go away and leave me to it. But you know, but the people I like working with are the ones, you know. It's not just the director; it's the editor. It's it's everybody from the team. I mean, Sherlock. You know, the sound effects guys, James Mather, they suddenly started turning up at orchestra sessions. And it was great because they wanted to know what we were doing with the sonic world so that they could, you know, so we were forever, you know, trying to complement each other.
You're kind of famously collaborative in terms of your work. I mean, there was all kinds of people who have all kinds of stories about, you know, you have teams of people and you have all kinds of stuff going on. Has it become simpler for you as you've gotten older and more experienced through all this?
No, I mean, you know, the thing to, you know, the part you shouldn't misunderstand about collaboration is collaboration. You know, it's not a democratic process. It's, you know, I'm the benign dictator. There's one point of view. You know, and yes, I pull other people in who work with me, and we talk about things, etc. But it's very much, you know. I mean, Sherlock is a sort of is a perfect example of because there's so little going on. You know, there's like one violin doing its thing. There's one cimbalom, one banjo doing its thing. So it's very specific, and the collaboration really comes from, you know, it starts off with casting my actors. You know, and it's not so much that I want them to improvise and go crazy or fill in holes. You know, I got enough ideas. You know, and actually the interesting thing is the better your collaborators are, the more you know you got to be on your toes, because as soon as you don't come up with an idea, they'll fill the hole with something that you don't actually want them to fill it with. You know, so you know it pushes you forward all the time.
So you're a conductor as well as a composer as well as
yeah. You know, and it all happens sort of in real time, and then I chuck everybody out, and I go through it, and and get rid of the bits that, getting back to there has always been controversy about my collaborations or. With the Academy, for instance, Dark Knight, is it disqualified? Can it be back in? Because I put my music editor and my orchestrator and a sound designer onto my cue sheet. Do you know what a cue sheet is?
Yeah.
I mean, don't judge. The cue sheet for me is an invoice to the Performing Rights Society.
Right.
Don't judge who did what and who the architect of the overall music is from looking at an invoice. The only reason I'm doing that is because, hey, they got kids too.
Right.
And I mean, I don't want to seem like some great philanthropic whatever.
Right.
But when I started out, I worked for a film composer called Stanley Myers. And Stanley, I didn't know it was unusual, but he would always share everything with me. He'd share credit with me. And I remember, having that first credit on a movie and my mum phoning me up and going, wow, this might work out, It made me feel good. So, I don't care about the credit. I don't care that, I mean, I don't need it,
Right.
And I think I'm just a bit more open about it.
Yeah.
It doesn't threaten me,
Do you think judgment has to do in part with the amount of success you've had? I mean, you're so ubiquitous.
Look, I think success is number one, the best revenge. Let's face it. And I think I've had the success because I was open. I was open to listening to filmmakers. I was open to hearing people's ideas and having really good people wanting to work with me because I was open to things. I wasn't going to go and make them become, ghostwriting always sounds very Dickensian to me, that you get some guy locked up in a room with, occasionally you feed him, but you never, the seconds of his life are ticking away, but nobody actually knows he's alive. That's what ghostwriting sounds to me, and I don't know, not my thing.
Right. Well, Sandy Bullock was on, I think, Leno last night, and he said, great movie, great job on the movie, and she was like, well, there are 300 other people who made this movie, and
exactly.
I'm not really in charge of everything.
No, exactly, and that's the part I like.
Yeah.
That's the part I like. I mean, we're not really making the movie just for one person. Part of what I like about movies, and I've always done movies, and I don't really understand television, is I like that communal experience. Like you go to the cinema, and even though it is you and you are watching this thing, but something happens because you're surrounded by other people watching it, and it changes your emotional perception. And the same happens very much in music. Music is about being playful. It's played. Music, you play music, and it's at its best when you play it with other people. It really, truly is. And there's certain pieces of music that, the internet is great, and iChat and all that stuff is fantastic. But, you still have to get all the musicians into a room to really make it happen. And it's eye contact, and it's tiny subliminal messages that musicians send to each other as this. They might not even be looking at each other, but you can hear the guy breathing next to you. That is that is a big thing of how you start off a piece of music.
So you're not just a guy with a synthesizer. I mean, I think there's some perception that you sit down in this room, I guess, in this magical room, which is amazing. I mean, it almost is like the set from Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, I didn't have to redecorate.
Or The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
But that you somehow, sit down at your synthesizer and create it, and you don't even need musicians. You kind of.
Well, it's. Look, yes. If you really want to know, I could do the whole thing by myself. I mean, I have done. Driving Miss Daisy, which is a very acoustic sounding score.